Hi there, I'm Andrew. Welcome to this week's 345 Tech Talk. Now, last week was a big subject, which is the 7 outcomes for success in software development. Paul and I only got onto 3 of them. So last week we were doing rapid delivery, available, scalable, and secure. And this week we're going to get onto the rest of the podcast, the rest of the conversation from last week, which is quality and bug free, it's costs optimized, and it's functional and lovable, standards compliant. Those are the 4 we're going through today. So, without much ado, welcome to the episode. We'll pick up the conversation from last week. 7 outcomes for success in software development, part 2. Enjoy. But the software factory is a nice segue into item 4. Quality.
We've moved on, have we?
Quality and bug free.
Wow.
I think we've got to move on.
So we've done 3, and we've got 4 today.
Yeah. So actually, as you go through, there does become a bit of an overlap. So we do actually get. Honestly, listeners, we do actually get. Like I would like to take this opportunity actually to thank everyone that's been watching on YouTube, listening to us. We have, literally. There's literally been tens of people listening.
Yeah.
No, we've been doing this three weeks, and we're kind of, we're it's like in the hundreds, so we're kind of really happy with that. It's been an amazing journey. So thanks for that, everyone. Quality and bug free. So again, if I'll start on this one, Paul, and then you tell me how much I'm wrong. So if you're doing things right, so let's imagine you've got a continuous delivery model. What you should be doing is putting in features. Features should be going in all the time. And so really your rate of finding, and you should be automating the testing on that, and so there shouldn't be many bugs, but there always are, because a bug is when the software behaves in a way that you don't intend. And so there always will be, because there will always be cases there'll always be scenarios you haven't thought about. There will always be ways in which people use the software, particularly if you've got a user interface and people use it in a way that you hadn't expected or intended. This always happens. But if you're doing things right and features are going in at a steady pace, so let's say, just for argument's sake, you release a feature a week into production. You should, and on average, a feature has 2 bugs. You should be raising a couple of bugs a week into production. So one of the things, so in terms of dimensions, in terms of how we look at this, one of the first things I'd look at is to look at defect rate over time. Because defect rate over time, if things are going well, it should be fairly low and fairly consistent. If things are, if you're doing like a waterfall project where you developers code a load of stuff and then throw it over the wall and say, test that, boys, you tend to find, no bugs are raised for ages, we've got really good quality, and then suddenly you get this tsunami of bugs, and then you're just in this thing of fighting as much as you can to stabilize and fix them, and then it's like, don't touch it, we've stabilized it, don't touch it, and so this kind of waves of defect rate is kind of a telltale kind of sign that your process smells. The second dimension I look at is the average time to fix these things, because again, if you've, for example, have this ties into the release cadence as well. If you've only got a few releases a year, and then and it's like it's in production now, don't touch it, then you can suddenly find that your average time to fix just goes through the roof, because actually you can't get fixes. You just simply can't get fixes through the pipeline very often. And the third dimension that I look at on quality is the fix rate. So if you've got, so what you want ideally is a nice, steady, and low defect rate. So let's say you've got 2 bugs a week being raised. You want 2 fixes a week, and then, or at least the capacity to fix at least 2 bugs a week, and then you are, you're on top of your quality, and and you want your average time to fix to be quite low, so that you're not carrying many defects, and that's kind of where I'd look as a sign of success. Is there any, is is there anything else that you particularly be looking at, particularly from a high level, as to drill into quality?
Well, first of all, probably worth clarifying average time to fix. I'm assuming you mean average time to fix and for that fix to reach a production environment, because there's obviously,
Yeah,
the
they're
average
different
time to
things. Yeah,
actually make the code change
yeah.
and commit a new change. But then there's the full process, the automated process sits on the back end that actually pushes that fix through to production.
So I think there are. I mean, in a continuous delivery kind of environment, those would pretty much be the same thing. In a in a slow, if you've got very periodic releases, they might be quite different. So yeah, it may be that if you've got a very slow release cadence, that you might need to measure those. You actually have two different measures for those. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and a lot of this comes down to the idea in the agile sense of a definition of done.
Yeah.
What does it, when you have a bug and you go to close it, what's the criteria for when that bug is complete? Is it when the code's been committed to your source code repository, or is it when available has actually been deployed to the production system? And so the time to fix is actually really more to do with time to close the bug and whatever the acceptance criteria means in that sense. So probably worth clarifying over that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point actually. But of course, I mean, we've got the whole stratum of verify where a lot of this stuff happens anyway. And when I mean, I'll get that up on the other screen right now. Just bear with me one moment. So yeah, so when we talk about quality, though, there are a number of things that we look at. So certainly under the verify, we've got the first thing is, and this is a really hard one because actually it tends to be the most manual, and that is verifying product and design intent. That a part of your business wanted this feature, and you end up delivering it, and then your architect wanted it built in a certain way, and the solution design is this, and how do you come across that? I mean, that's actually quite a hard one to keep on top of. Static analysis is quite an easy one. That's just making sure running static tests on your code, which can be style or the cyclical complexity and all that sort of thing. Those are and then you've got the unit test kind of stuff, integration test, the performance non-functional test, and then we get to another one which can be quite hard, which is the user and usability testing, which I mean, you can test UIs without having in an automated way, but usability is actually quite a difficult thing to test. So there's a few areas there that we can drill into. If we're looking at quality and what the sort of issues we're having, there's a number of those areas that we can drill through to sort of say, well, actually, you want to invest some time in this particular part of it.
Yeah, tests is an interesting one because, I mean, typically, I think these days in the software development industry, I think most people would say that a test-driven development approach is a good thing.
Yep.
It's but that tends to encompass certain types of tests. So typically more unit tests. But there are obviously lots of different types of tests, and every test exists in order to improve quality.
Yeah.
But you've got to think about an application not just in the context of maybe an object, a class that you're testing.
Because ultimately, what what you want to get to is what is the end service, isn't it? Or what?
Yeah,
and that's why we look at outcomes. That's why, because things can be impacted in two ways. Because if you've got the quality and bug free is an outcome, whereas the different things are how you achieve that. But it's all pointing towards the outcome. But if you focus on the things that you do rather than the outcome, you might say, I've got brilliant unit tests and my application's rubbish.
Yeah, or, yeah, exactly. Or my end-to-end application doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because in these days, your application is almost likely to consist of more than one component.
Yeah, I mean, we're massive on microservices architecture, all that sort of stuff, and that is all about lots of things interacting with each other. And
Exactly. So
yeah,
you can have a perfect unit test, but if you built an integration test, you might find that it doesn't work. And then when you have an application journey, user journey through an application, then you probably need to be thinking of scenario tests or end-to-end tests.
yeah,
You might have an integration test that works between two services, but an end-to-end test might not work
yeah,
because
because the
user
user
journey
journey
is
and the
so-
way, yeah, the way that that's right, and I mean, it's useful to sort of reflect on this point that because we've been doing integration for a long time, haven't we?
yes, very long.
And it always used to be that that you'd write a load of stuff, and in particular, if we've worked for like vendors and software consultancies, software houses, this sort of thing, and you deliver a solution into your customer, and they integrate it with the rest of their stuff, and that's when all hell breaks loose. And it's that integration experience that often flushes out just
And
who.
everyone blames the middleware.
Well, every,
All
well, it's
parties blame the middleware.
well, it's the blaming the middleware is the software version of shoot the messenger, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's like who if the middleware talks to something else that breaks, and the middleware says, "Oh, that other thing's broken. There's an error." And it's like, "Oh, that that
You make
middleware's
area.
that middleware's a
Make
bit pesky,
area.
isn't it?" So yeah, it's
But tests are all about layering.
yeah,
So it's layering confidence.
and that's what we're trying to do in our model, isn't it? Is that we're trying to make sure that we've got all those layers,
Exactly
so
that.
so, so that we've covered we've covered all the bases.
Exactly that. So your layers mean different things. So you're testing the component level unit tests. You test um, between the communication between services with the integration tests. You're testing end-to-end user journeys with end-to-end tests or scenario-based testing. You have acceptance tests, right? So what does when somebody needs to sign off on the new feature? What is it that they're signing off on? So you need some sort of acceptance criteria, and you need
Yeah,
accept. So whether that's user acceptance tests or some sort of like service level acceptance tests.
and that goes right back to what you were saying about definition of done, because if you haven't given your developers those criteria when they're given their task, then how the hell are they going to get it right first time? It's like, it sounds like the bleeding obvious,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it is actually amazing how often developers are doing the best they can, and then 6 months later someone comes along and says, "Why did you do it like that?" It's like, well, because no one told me, and
Exactly. The definition of done is basically like a checklist of more of the sort of non-functional side. So you'd have acceptance criteria for your tasks,
mm,
which would be very specific to the task itself. So you would,
yeah,
if you're kind to the developers, you'd have a nice task description, and you'd be very clear on what it is that you want to achieve from the completion of this task.
yeah, and then definition of done is more generic, as in
It's much more generic,
yeah,
but
unit
what
tests are
are all the
done, test
things?
coverage is like this, it deploys, it's all that da 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 is those kind of
Exactly,
I've
and
got as far as the integration environment and everything's still green, therefore I can now say, okay, at least for this part of it, we're good.
exactly. So, and we talk about pressure on rapid delivery. This is another place where you get pressure because you can have a very small definition of done and achieve rapid delivery, or you could have a
Yeah,
very large definition of done, which naturally will slow you down. But
and
then
and
large
what yeah,
done should drive your quality up.
but one of the things and again when we do our so when we do our engineering, sometimes it looks like it looks to the unaided eye like we're spending a lot of time farting around with detail,
Yeah.
because because you kind of appreciate that when you're fixing stuff on the dev's workstation, you might get them to do a bit of extra work there, because if you get something that contaminates further downstream, the amount of time you waste fixing all that mess is far worse. So that's where kind of you might put a lot more time into this, into all this definition of done stuff, because you're trying to make sure that that in terms of rapid delivery, if suddenly people have written a whole load of absolute garbage that gets as far as your integration environment, and then you can't get it out the door, then that doesn't help anyone.
No, no, it doesn't. I think there's also another really good point to make here, in this particular outcome, and it's about functional versus non-functional, because it's that there's always the pressure to deliver functional changes,
Yeah.
because those are new features that customers see.
Yeah.
And from the perspective of product owners in the business, that really
product owners typically are feature owners, aren't they?
that they are, and they tend to only really care about features.
And it tends to, and it's a funny, and it's all those battles, isn't it? Because product owners tend to be feature owners, and architects tend to be non-functional owners.
Yes.
And the product owners will say, "Oh, my customer doesn't care about your refactoring," until either, "Why is my feature late?" Oh, it's because the code base is a complete load of spaghetti and we just can't fix it anymore. Or, "Why is my system really slow?"
Yeah.
And it's like, well, because you didn't put any work into your architecture and you put it all into features.
Exactly that. And in my experience, probably somewhere, maybe the 80-20 rule, maybe even a 90-10 rule, is that the happy path or the feature itself, the functional aspect of the feature, is a tiny part of the time spent on the task.
Yeah.
It's the effort that you put into the non-functional side.
I mean, particularly from UI, I always used to tell people that because a lot of functional stuff, ultimately it comes down to UI, because particularly if you're doing like line of business apps, or if you're doing web apps or something like that, that's the bit people see. I always say it's an iceberg. That the UI is the bit that's sticking above the water, and you've got the rest of the iceberg underneath it. And so when people say, "How long can it take to pop a button on there and show this bit of data?" and it's like, well, it doesn't take long from the screen point of view, but like, where does that data come from? How do you make sure it's reliable? How do you clean it? How's it, all that other stuff. It's like all that bit of the iceberg, isn't it, that's underneath?
Exactly, and we talked about resilience before. It's how do you deal with exception scenarios? How do you make it available, scalable, resilient? It's
and product owners and product owners are often very bad at this. They're like, "I want this to work, and then I want the customer to press this button and they'll be happy," and they're really bad at defining all the non-happy path stuff. Generally, in my experience, sorry, product managers, sorry, product owners. I'm not, I'm not talking about you. It's the others. It's not you. But in general, it's very easy for them to just think, I want it to be like this. The sun shines, everyone's happy. But actually, when you come down to, when you come down to it, it's life isn't like that.
Yeah, it's just about having an understanding that that there has to be effort.
Yeah.
Into the non-functional side. It's just a natural part of software development. That's going to happen.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. And where that leads us on to, I'm not sure if that's if that's a clunky link or not, but where that leads us on to, because one of the things is with this stuff, and it then impacts on costs quite a lot. And so one of our other outcomes, and this could be, we could actually put this a lot higher up the list. It doesn't matter because all the 7 outcomes, the idea is that you achieve a good score across all of them, not across one of them. So, but it's optimizing costs, and because everyone wants their costs for, everyone wants the moon on a stick and for it to be really cheap. It's obvious that's just human nature. And so when we look at costs, I mean, particularly for us, if the outcome is, a common one is either my systems aren't available and scalable and they cost me a fortune, or I'm not getting much delivery and it's costing me a fortune. But when we drill into costs, so the first thing it's like, okay, what do you mean by cost? Where are you spending it? Do you mean is it the development cost? Is it the cost of your projects to develop? Is it the cost of running this stuff, the operational costs? And the operational costs can be IT costs, or they can be all the people that you've got manually dealing with workarounds because you've got holes in your process that aren't automated. And the other thing is obviously the cost of capital. Have you got a massive amount of capital that you've got to find, and then that become an okay capital becomes write downs and and that becomes a cost in when you get to accounting.
Yeah.
Does your capital become an annual cost, or is it a one-off? Leaving aside the accounting of it, there's capital, there's operations, and there's development. And the first thing is, which of those really is your problem, or is it all of them? And as we go into capex, it's like, well, what are you doing with
Are you buying hardware?
Are you buying hardware? And if you're buying hardware, it's like, why?
Yeah.
I mean, especially now. I mean, when was AWS released?
2006.
2006. Azure was released 2008.
Yeah.
The hardware refresh cycles tend to be sort of 5 years. And a lot of companies, so, it can be less, it can be more, but typical thing is like 5-year refresh. So since cloud was available, you've had over 2 hardware refreshes. Why are you still buying hardware? That's the first thing. And I don't really know, unless they've got a specific reason for it, then I think that's a bit of a
I think people do have, some companies do have, really good reasons as to why they need to buy hardware, but it certainly should be a question asked.
Yeah, it is a question. It's why
buying that hardware.
Yeah,
justification for it.
Yeah, so it's not so that's one of the things that we're always asking is why. Why are you doing that? And if there is a justification for it, then that's that's okay. But a lot of the time, it's because that's what we used to do.
Yeah.
Isn't really a justification for it. That's just that's just lazy. So the next one to look at really is if operational costs are very high, and operational costs can be people, they can be support contracts, they can be leasing equipment, they can be software license costs. So it's, it can, like I say, it can be. I've got all these first line support people answering phones because people are ringing up saying the software doesn't work. Where is it in the operational costs? What's the breakdown in the operational costs and why are they so high? And that in turn can point to, have we chosen the right technologies? Have we got quality issues? Have we got we can flush out some of those things from operational costs. If have we actually been skimping on development or prioritizing the wrong features because we've got a whole load of we've got 3,000 people doing customer support because the website doesn't work properly.
Cause and effect, isn't it?
Yeah, cause and effect. So have actually we ended up with really high operational costs because we saved stuff in development costs. It's that sort of thing. You've got to kind of look at it in a holistic way, because it's really easy to cut costs in one place, but they have a nasty habit of popping up somewhere else if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And cutting scope on a software project that then ramps up some kind of operational cost is a classic one for that.
And
Yeah,
a lot of that is in literally what we were just talking about in terms of quality.
yeah,
And you decide that actually, you know what, having this really really high quality bar is impacting on our rapid delivery
yeah,
outcome.
and our
Uh,
development cost.
Therefore, let's reduce our quality goals. But what's happened is you've got an impacted, potentially got an impacted your costs and your
In your operations. Yeah,
as a result.
yeah,
It's about being able to understand those links between making a decision in one area affects,
yeah.
can affect another. And it's
Uh,
about together, isn't it?
yeah, and then there is and then the last one is development costs, and this is also an interesting one, because it's like, okay, first question is, your development costs too high. Why are they too high? What's the breakdown? Where is the money going? And there is a I'm a big fan of Agile Manifesto. And I think that came out, was it 2000? The Agile Manifesto. It's a long time ago.
I remember that.
But if you
Yeah.
look at Agile Manifesto, I'm not going to pull it up on the screen, but one of the things is the primary measure of progress is working software. And there's also a lean, it's kind of a lean thinking, which came from lean manufacturing, which came from the likes of Toyota. And way back when I actually used to be an aerospace engineer and not in software, I used to do lean manufacturing and kind of did all that stuff when it was actually about making things. But it's like, what is the value? Understand where your value is, and then look at what is it that is not contributing directly to that value. So, the value in a development project, typically speaking, the value is working software, and whatever else goes around that makes that software either sellable or valuable to the business. So, which can be training, it can be documentation, it can be all those ancillary things that sit around it that enable that software to be used in a valuable way. That is your value. What else is it that you're doing that doesn't contribute to that? And if you look at some organizations spend a lot of time writing documents, and you've really got to be brutal about is any that this document is here so that a board of people can look at it and say yes or no, and then someone else reads it and then it's done. Is that really the best use of your time? And a lot of organizations can get into this situation where they have a massive process for all the right reasons, because they might be regulated, they might be you know they might just be risk averse, and yet you start to, if you make the process too heavyweight, you start the process starts to look like it's the thing you should be concentrating on rather than the output of the process. And that's a really kind of there's a real telltale thing there, that when you do that, you're the amount you're spending on building stuff is the bit that goes down and down and down, and the amount of analysts, architects, project managers, people that seem to hang on to the project and no one knows what they do, no one knows what they're doing,
Yeah.
those kind of things go right up, and it's like, that's something to look out for there. Testers is another thing, and I've got a real kind of, I have a really strong opinion about this, that testers should be writing tests and not running them. And I know a lot of testers that are really good, that think in a different way from developers, and so actually they that whole testing is a really valuable thing, as long as they're thinking of how you test, what those scenarios are, and writing tests. But if you've got testers that are running tests, if you find that you've got hundreds of testers and they're manually executing stuff all the time. Oh, I'm just spending today logging my results. That's no. The value of your testers is writing tests. It's not running them. So that's another big one. And then anything else that people are doing that's just like, oh, I'm building an environment. I'm deploying stuff. Those kind of, because those are parasitic. If you let those manual things creep in, where people are manually building environments, where people are manually deploying to environments, not only do those ultimately cause quality issues, but they also are a parasitic cost on your project. And so, oh, it's really expensive to build this infrastructure and deploy it. Therefore, we'll slow our release cadence, and therefore we'll ruin our rapid delivery. And that's why these things tend to link up.
And also, when you do that, it's not repeatable, right? So the
Yeah.
repeatability is gone.
Well,
So you might then spend weeks trying to figure out why an environment doesn't work.
You cannot have quality without repeatability. It's simply, repeatability is almost like the first step on the way to quality. I mean, even like going back to manufacturing, statistical process control, the first thing is make your process repeatable, and then you can start to tighten the tolerances on that. But if you haven't got any basis of repeatability, then you are absolutely in the wrong place. So automation, repeatability goes right down to that, and a lot of that, a lot of the stuff that we're looking at with testing and testing release, building environments. You don't have people doing that every time. You have people do it. You have people scripting it, and then it works, and it works in the same way every time.
And pretty much all of the costs that you've been talking about so far from a development perspective are somewhat avoidable with automation. So the more you automate, the less your costs will be in the long term. The higher the quality, because the more repeatable the process. Obviously, there is an upfront investment. So there's always an investment to automation, but that investment pays off over the long term. So
if you're gonna make cars, the first thing you do is you build your factory.
Yep.
And then you've got a repeatable way of building cars, and it's the same thing.
So you're sweating that investment, in fact, aren't you, over the long term?
Yeah, and you know what? It's like if you've done, like we do, we put a lot of effort into this, and so the ideal thing is that you can commit to master, and then that goes through a whole cycle and goes to production. If you find a critical bug, and actually I can fix that, and boom, it's done, it's fixed. That is such a nice place to be in. I mean, not that you get those very often, but it's the peace of mind from knowing, oh, hang on, we've got to sort that out. Right, it's sorted now. That is a really nice place to be, and that's we're kind of digressing a little bit off cost, but it's like we can't impress on people enough. Automation is important because automation lets people do the valuable thing, which is apply their brains into solving business problems, and not having people do non-valuable things, which is I'll run this test again, or I'll deploy this again. That's not a valuable thing. A valuable thing is writing a script to deploy it. Those are the sort of things that that's what we should be doing, because that's the interesting thing. You solve a problem once, and that's interesting. You solve a problem. You solve the same problem for the 100th time, and that's really tedious. So there's a couple of other things on that we look at in costs, and because this does impact on automation, and so the development process, the verify process, the release process, costs of there's a big load of stuff in there from automation. The other one is people, and so when we talk about our team, the team part of our model. Let me just get this on the other screen. So for those of you on the audio version, our team's stratum has it has a number of areas in it: skills, knowledge, alignment, autonomy, flex, and results. And so the cost does come into flex, really, because this is the whole thing of do you have a steady demand on your team, or do you have or do you have busy and quiet times? And so it's like, okay, you want you want a permanent team to meet your steady load, and you want to be able to have more expensive but short-term people you bring in as the flex. And it's like, and so the how you manage your how you manage your team costs, like that. So, for example, if you've gone to, let's not name any of the big consultancy companies. We know who you are. Um, but yeah, they might go and say, yeah, okay, it's not uncommon for consultancies to have hundreds or even thousands of people working for a single client, and those people are there for years, and you kind of think, well, are you really, is that really the best use of your money? So there's a, if that becomes a steady state thing forever, that you're paying that, if you're paying team as a steady state, are you really, is this in the right way? Because you've got your permanent people, then you've got your your own, then you've got your temps, and then you've got your external consultants, and I'm not trying to shoot ourselves in the foot, because we are 345 as a business is high value external consultants, but we focus on small numbers with really niche skills, rather than have 100 people for 5 years. And if you're in that position, you should. I think businesses should be really questioning their the way they're spending their money if they're doing that. And I think that's me personally, I think that's that. They should be questioning that.
It is a good point about steady state. Is that, can you ultimately, can you do that cheaper with permanent members of staff if you're having to pay that out anyway to an external consultancy on a 5 or 10 year contract?
Yeah, and the other thing is, if I mean, I'm quite passionate about having our own guys and people, but it's with the best will in the world. If you've got a large consultancy, whose interest are they working in? Are they working in yours, or are they working in someone else's? And I'm not saying you shouldn't use consultants. You should absolutely use consultants for either short-term things or for skills that you can't keep in-house. There are skills that you can't keep in-house, but when you've got hundreds of people doing the same thing for, like, say, for 5-10 years, really, it's like, just really make sure you're getting value for money on that.
And what happens when those guys go? They leave a skills vacuum behind, which you need to fill.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh my God, I need another consultancy to skill mine. So really have a, I can't say it enough. I'll go back to showing the team part on the Six Strata. So there is a skills thing, and you need to, as a business strategy, you need to look at how you're providing these skills into your business. One of the things, and this is not to be underestimated either, and that's the knowledge aspect of it. That one of the things that a lot of the big outsourcing companies say is, oh, this IT stuff, it's all about skills, isn't it? So we can find you the skills. What they can't find you is the knowledge. What they can't find you is the degree of domain knowledge, particularly knowledge about your business. So in our model, we separate out skills and knowledge, because retaining that core, if you ever go to a good team always has a nucleus of people that have got the core knowledge, and a good team finds ways of spreading that core knowledge into and infusing new members with that core knowledge. And then you find that rubbish teams are really bad at that, and so people are having to sort of almost learn from scratch, and then they start going slowly, and so.
Well, the knowledge is held in only one or two members, right?
And then if they leave, and then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And there's a couple of other things that that we have on the team thing, and the team thing, actually, it's a massive part, and it's an episode all on its own. But the things that really impinge on, well, cost and rapid delivery often go hand in hand, particularly with dev costs and rapid delivery. One of the other things is alignment, and that is every member of the team focused on the same goals and achieving those goals in the same way, in the same timescales, and that whole thing of alignment. And there are ways of doing that. I mean, Scrum tried to do that with the sprint planning, the sprint backlog,
Goals, yeah.
daily stand-ups, sprint retrospectives. It's trying to formalize a process for doing that. Um, as long as you focus on what that's about, and that is keeping everyone aligned on the right goals and making sure that they're focused on the results and that sort of thing. But the alignment and the mindset that goes with alignment is a big thing, because if people are not focused on the value, and go back to this thing of what is the valuable thing we're producing. If people aren't focused on that value, then your costs will go up, your timescales will go out the window. And one of the other things that is autonomy. But another place where things go massively wrong is when teams lack autonomy. And again, Agile Manifesto. We build teams around committed individuals, and it's and we give those people the autonomy to do the job. And yet you find, particularly in large organisations, that that here's your delivery people over here, and then there's another team over here that actually are telling them yes or no, and you've got to do it like we say. But the team that's doing that has no responsibility for, they've got all levers to stop things happening, and yet they've got no responsibility for delivery. And so that autonomy is autonomy of teams, and getting the barriers out of the way between from teams creating value to delivering it is a really important thing, and will impact massively on your costs. And you find that often, like you say, when you have an explosion of project managers, analysts, people doing stuff that's process documents, those are all symptoms that actually you've got problems in the alignment and autonomy areas. And so we go in and fix a lot of that, make sure that they give people clear instructions about what they need to do, and give them the autonomy to do it. And you find that your costs will massively go down, and your a lot of actual job satisfaction will go up, delivery speed will go up, all those things, just by getting get all those people away from poking their noses into delivery if they're not responsible for it. Okay, I'll get off that soapbox.
Yeah.
I've been on my soapbox quite a lot today, but this is stuff that I'm obviously, I obviously care about this stuff, because I've seen it go right and I've seen it go wrong. And once you've been in, when you've worked in teams where things have been right, it's even doubly painful when you see teams where it's all going wrong. And so we can fix this stuff. We can fix this.
Okay.
Okay. This is the first. I think for the first time, I'm not the one saying we need to get on, and Paul's the one saying
Yeah. So I would say that is a good end to the costs optimized outcome. That was 5 outcomes, so we still have people.
Okay, but I think some of these are. So
they're very emotive subjects, actually, a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's and also really big subjects.
Yeah. So let's very quickly go over a couple of last ones. Function and lovable. So one of the reasons why I separate out function and lovable is because I separate it out from quality and separate it out from availability and scalability, is because it's still an outcome, but it's different. It's how functional means does it do what it's meant to? Are there holes in it where if you've cut scope, and it's the classic thing of we can take orders from our website, and then actually that order ends up going to a printer and being printed out, and someone walks across the office with it and types it into another thing. That's a hole in your process, and that comes from usually from cutting scope. But also there's do customers love using your product, or do they just tolerate using it? And those are, it's a really hard one to look at, and this is a, if this outcome is one you're struggling with, it can be a very hard thing to go from functional to lovable, so you can go from it kind of we get away with it to it's fully functional through to it's lovable, and that's a journey. And this, and it can be there can be a lot of kind of ninja skills going in there to make sure that to get to lovable, because
Yeah, lovable is very subjective, isn't it?
it
But
is it is, and that's why with but it's not only subjective, but it's also emotional, and
yes,
that's why you know again, a lot of developers being analytical types um, do get very emotional about their software, but often can, but it can be often very difficult to put that into words. And uh, that. So for example, I'll just give you an example. Not product plugging or anything, but I can remember going from let's say the first iPhone I had. The first iPhone I had was a 3GS. It's quite a while ago,
yeah,
and I'd gone from some other smartphone. I can't remember who it was made by. It might have been LG or something, and it worked. And then I got this iPhone, and it was like, wow. I mean, if you looked at it now, it'd probably be remarkably quaint. But just that kind of thing about everything, it was just there was something indescribably good about the design of it that just made using it a joy compared to what you'd used before. And and Apple have always been really good at this. Apple have always been really good at this emotional design of making things really good to use. I mean, another example is that we use a project management system called ClickUp, and that's actually really nice. It's not quite Apple in its design, but it's really nice in just the way it's just got lots of little things that just work in just that intuitive way that you don't need to read the manual, and it's just like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Oh, that's really easy. And even now we keep we kind of find little nuggets in that that's just like, oh, I didn't know I could do that, and that's really and that getting to that kind of design is really hard.
just
And
thought makes you feel good while using it, because I mean,
makes
all products are there for a functional reason, right?
yeah
If you weren't, if you were not looking to say run a project, or to have a bunch of tasks you want to keep track of, then you wouldn't be using ClickUp. But if you did have a bunch of tasks that you want to keep track of, then actually it's a very nice experience while doing so.
yeah, and it's but so to go from so one of the things I find is that with when we're looking at the outcomes and how can we lift the outcomes on this and where do you look. So if we're struggling with functional, generally speaking, a lot of functional problems either come with we're not capturing requirements correctly, we're not testing them correctly, we're not or everything is too expensive, we've overrun. So delivery is too slow or too expensive, and so we've cut scope. And those are the areas where you kind of you need to look to fix the functional part of it. To fix
Yeah,
the lovable part of it, you've got to get a big part of that is in terms of the determined part. We look at product. Yeah, there are people that you need to get in your team that inject that element into it. So you need to have different people, and you need to have people that can do emotional design and do have a bit more flair and there's a real kind of people thing in there that we to really go from functional to lovable. You've got to look at your people and get
but
them.
also equally, you need to, customer validation is a massive part of that.
Yeah, and that you're absolutely right. And it's like, how do you? Because one of the things those people need to do is they need to be talking to the customers and understanding them and saying, "Oh, what do you think of this?" And it's not just originating that, but it's almost that it's that dialogue and that outward lookingness, looking into the outside world, empathizing with people, and that's one of the things that a lot of engineers find difficult. And so that's why it's kind of you've got to look at the people and make sure you've got all different personality types, all of equal value, and you need a blend of them. And so you just need to make sure that you've got the right blend of people, so that you've got some people in there that are outward looking and but also they get this stuff as well.
Absolutely.
Moving swiftly on.
Good. Yeah, that was good.
And
So, we are on to the last outcome.
the last outcome, which is standards compliant.
Standards compliant, and this is potentially quite a big area.
It's kind of a big. It is and it isn't. It isn't because we're going to get through this in like 5 minutes. And it isn't because again, one of the reasons why we use the 7 outcomes is the question is always fleshing out why. So, firstly, if you're not standards compliant, if you're not complying with your standards, then is there a requirements thing or is there a scope thing? What is it that's stopping you? And the other thing is, are you finding it easy to maintain to be compliant? And that often, again, is that many standards come into effectively 2 things. One of which is there is the choice of technology, how you design your solution, those kind of, how you segment your network, all, how you do, how you design in your security. There's those kind of elements. So there's a solution and technology kind of element to standards, and then there is an operational element to standards as well. If it's GDPR, it's like, how do I exercise my right to be forgotten? How do I find out what information is on if a customer comes, how do you service their request to give them all the information you've got on them? How do you delete all the information from them if that's what they ask? So and if PCI DSS is, then it's like, what are your security procedures around this? How often you verifying your so the places that difficulty with standards surface is either in the run part of it, the operations, or in the solution and technology part.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the organizational impact of being compliant, also comes under the run part.
Yeah, that's the operations.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not necessarily just about, in terms of the technology, or maybe there's a process someone runs which is run against a system. It could be that every member of staff needs to be vetted in terms of security. Maybe that, or maybe only
certain, which is a good point, actually, because
that certain systems also that need to be vetted. Maybe they need to have specific training for what they do.
Yeah, and then you're into vendors as well, and so, and what you're doing with your vendors to make sure that they're also doing their part on that.
Exactly, and a lot of this comes into the sort of industry that you exist in.
And I think that's one of the hard things to generalize about this, isn't it? That because different industries have such different needs. I mean, some of them are fairly generic. So security tends to be fairly generic, and some of the process type stuff tends to be fairly generic. But each industry then has their own specific standards that you need to meet. So we can't generalize too much about industry specific stuff. We can't go off talking about HIPAA for if you're a bank.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, but there are obviously some, like GDPR. GDPR is jurisdictional, so EU. But it's generic to the point where if you're storing people's personal data or anything about a person in your systems, then you're affected by GDPR.
Yeah.
But that's jurisdictional. And there are a lot of other compliance standards that are jurisdictional, or they might be still related to the finance industry, but each jurisdiction has a different set.
Yeah, well, but the thing that and kind of keeping on the topic of this, what are the things that affect success though? That's what and that's what I'm kind of that's what we always need to sort of drill into first, is that what are the barriers to achieving success with these things?
Um, it's well, I mean, quite often you with a lot of these standards, then you're always going to have some external organization that's going to audit
Yeah.
because and regularly audit. So success isn't just implementing the process within the organization, um, passing the first audit and go, yes, great, we got the tick.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process. So from the perspective of the organization, it is an ongoing investment in being compliant with a particular standard. So some of them are voluntary, and that might be a decision taken by the
Like a management decision.
the
Yeah.
management of this to make the decision. We are going to be compliant with this because it gives us competitive advantage, maybe
Or customer trust.
customer trust.
It's a big one, isn't it? That you might go for a particular standard, big customer trust, or you know,
Exactly. There might well be laws of the land which say you have to, in order to do business, you have to be compliant with these standards. And then obviously, as we say, industry. So in some cases this is sort of forced on the organization. If you want to play in this area, then you need to be compliant with these standards. In other cases, it's optional. In terms of how you see success in these things is it's an ongoing process. Success ultimately is the auditor saying you've passed.
and organize and so success. The auditor saying you've passed, and the organisation saying, "Hey, that didn't hurt." And I
And
think
and and
that's the other side of it is that like we didn't have to completely, you know, it wasn't painful for our business model to achieve that.
and so the other indicator of success, I guess you could say, a bit tongue in cheek, is um, that you've not been fined by a regulator as a result of a failure in the process.
Yeah, and
If you've failed to recognise a risky customer or risky transaction, and
yeah,
you're on anti-money laundering rules, and you fail to recognise that, you fail, your processes fail. You could be in for a fine, or even worse. Executives could be in for potential imprisonment.
yeah,
So,
and
there's one measure of success, which is to get the certificate, and the other one
the
is that your
yeah,
processes are working. And
the peace of mind. I used to work for a financial company, and I remember the MD of that one saying that there's a line with regulation, and on one side of it, sales become easier, but you're not compliant. If you go too far the other way, you're massively compliant, but you've got no sales. And so you've got this line in the middle, which is this is the absolute edge of being regulated. But if you're on that absolute edge, if you're on that tightrope, then it's not a comfortable place to be because you only have to misstep a small amount, and then you're on the wrong side, and then you're at risk of fines. And so what you want to be is to sort of say, okay, I'll be far enough inside that line that if I take a small misstep, I'll still be inside the actual edge. And that is the I can and that was and that amount that gap between the two he described as that's the I sleep soundly at night line. And so that's also a kind of good way of looking at it.
it's yeah, absolutely. And I would say that it's becoming compliant in whatever standard um, is not to be underestimated in terms of the cost of the business, and and the ongoing cost.
Yeah.
It's a significant undertaking. Um, obviously companies do achieve certification. I mean, and there are companies out there that certainly help. Other companies achieve certification, but it is it's not something you can just say, oh, let's try and get certification on the side, and we just get Joe to do it, and
Yeah.
in 3 months' time we get the certificate. It's
Yeah, I mean, maybe a long time ago,
organization.
a long time ago, you might have been able to get away with those things.
Yeah.
I do remember, again, I'm not that old, folks, but I do remember working in some companies where they'd gone through, at some point, they'd gone through a quality thing and they'd written a whole load of procedures and got them signed off, and then no one ever read them. And that was, and that gaining certification was an event. I think certainly all the standards bodies now are much smarter about that, and they're much smarter about um, it's how the question they come in with is, how do you prove that you followed the how do you, okay you've got a procedure, how do you prove you followed it?
Exactly. It's
And
all evidence based.
it's all evidence based, and that actually, and that's a very different thing from, have we got a procedure? Is, how do you prove you followed it? Even if you have followed it, because there's having the procedure and no one follows it. Then there's we've got a procedure and everyone follows it, but we can't prove it. But how do you prove it? And funnily enough, technology is a solution for that people use to actually do that for them.
Exactly. And generally speaking, you'd have some sort of quality management system that would support the number of processes that you need to adopt and work against. It's and I've been involved in something similar with pharmaceutical, where the quality management system itself becomes extremely important from a pharma perspective, and it encompasses everything about the software development, delivery, and operational processes for the stuff that we were doing anyway. To the point where the production of the process within the quality management system was a project in its own right.
Yeah,
it's that important to the pharmaceutical industry that anybody doing anything within that, given the fact that what we were doing was nothing to do with manufacturing medicine, where the tolerances are very fine. If you're creating a pill, you want to make sure that that it's got the right level of chemicals in it.
And that seems obvious. So when you're manufacturing a pill, that seems obvious.
Right? It's but when you're talking about more a general IT system, it feels weird to have to go through the same level of rigor, but that's what's required by the industry. And it is a significant effort in order to implement a quality management system, a set of processes, and then to every time you go through the process, that you are producing the evidence that you've actually done it. And all of that is all audited as part of that process. So it's definitely a significant undertaking, but obviously gives in some cases where it's optional, gives companies competitive advantage. That's for sure.
Awesome. So let's summarize then. Is there any way we now we've got to the end of all this, and it's been quite a journey.
It's been an epic.
It has been an epic. So let's summarize. So we've got we've got we use a model where we talk about the 7 outcomes, and those outcomes are rapid delivery, available and scalable, secure, quality and bug-free, costs are optimized, software is for systems to function and lovable, and they are standards compliant. And the reason we have this is that that first of all is to look at what success looks like. If we have weaknesses, if we have any areas in these places, it gives us a point at which we can start drilling in and saying, how can we improve on this? And then we've got our framework to sort of say, okay, if you've got weaknesses in this particular area, then you need to point at, then we look at our 6 strata model and say, okay, that basically means you've got hotspots in this and this area, and that's where we'd sort of look to put the improvements in, because that's where the biggest kind of the biggest return on that effort comes from. So that is 7 outcomes for success. So keep a success mindset. Focus on what success looks like. Don't focus on the activities. Focus on what success looks like and the overall value. What is the value you're producing at the end? And that's how we make successful businesses, and that's how we become successful people. So not only has this been about software, it's also a lesson in life.
Fantastic. Who would have thought, hey, going from software development to life lessons?
Well, the parallels are there.
You know, brilliant.
So I'm going to wrap up now, and I'd like to thank you, Paul, again for your immense experience and brain, and I'd like to thank everyone watching and listening for bearing with us. And we will be back next week with another exciting topic. So thank you for listening to 345 Tech Talks. Please like, subscribe. We're on all sorts of outlets. We're on TuneIn, we're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, many others. We are on YouTube. So please select your favorite way of consuming the podcast, subscribe to us, and more life-changing revelations next week.